I am pleased to introduce to you Dr. Diane Heacox, and consultant and a professional learning facilitator focusing on strategies to increase learning success for all students. She's professor emerita at St. Catherine University in St. Paul, Minnesota. As a national and international consultant and professional development trainer, Diane has worked in public, private, and international schools on a variety of topics related to teaching and learning. Dr. Heacox has taught at both elementary and secondary school levels and has served as a gifted education teacher and administrator, as well as an instructional specialist in public education. Dr. Heacox is also the author of 4 books, 2 of which are National Book Award winners. And the second edition of Differentiation for Gifted Learners is now available. And I haven't seen the second edition yet, Diane, but I want to tell everybody, I highly recommend the first edition, which I have seen and do have. And so thank you so much for joining us tonight, Diane. And please, everybody, join us for Underachievement or Underlearning.
Hello, those of you who are in Colorado and beyond. This session has a focus on 2 different issues that I have had great concern over for a long time, and it's underachievement and underlearning. Underachievement, those of you who are familiar with my work, was really my first foray into what's going on with these gifted kids who aren't performing. And so the result of the book, Up from Underachievement, came from my work with underachievers in the K-12 setting. Underlearning is a new term to lots of us. It comes from Amsterdam, and Eleanor van Gerven, Dr. Eleanor van Gerven work on underlearning. When she and I met and we talked, we realized we had some commonalities. But I also felt that her work in underlearning was particularly important as it applies to gifted learners. So that is our focus for tonight. I do want to tell you that the PowerPoint handouts, a PDF of the PowerPoint handouts, will be available, and we're in the process of working on how to get them to you. I already realize that many of the PowerPoint slides are text heavy. And the reason they are is because I'm sharing as many ideas with you as I can. But I do think it'd be easier for you to go from a PowerPoint handout yourself. So we'll see what we can do about getting those out. Keep in mind that we are sprinting through this information. And so I really welcome your patience. Underachievement is a discrepancy. And when we look for underachievers, as I did in my role in gifted education in 2 different districts, we're looking for a gap between their potential, in other words, their innate ability, or we could say aptitude, and their performance. And for many schools, when they think about performance, they think about achievement. It also could be classroom performance. Basically, we're seeing a gap. Their predicted level of achievement is not being met. When we talk about underachievement, we're not talking about a short dip in the road where kids are underachieving for a week or 2 and then they're back contributing again. Underachievement definition is severe and persistent. And it also is not attributable to any diagnosed learning disability. So it is something that is day by day with these students, and that's one of the reasons it's so difficult to do interventions and work with them in turning the pattern of underachievement around. When we think about underachievement, we think that the frame of underachievement is a behavior. So it's a behavior on the part of students. Karen Rogers and her colleague Vig in 2012 identified different groups or ways in which we look at kids who are struggling or non-producing in school. I love the work because I certainly know kids who are like these descriptors. So if you would, as I go through these descriptors, if you take a minute about students that are in your life presently or in your past professional life and who might fit in these categories. Non-producers are students that are probably the most frustrating teachers because they do nothing. They don't do daily work. They don't do homework. Yet when it's time for summative assessment, standardized tests, they perform exceedingly well. So it's kind of one of those, how do we see after the daily work when they're doing so splendidly on the assessment? A second description of these kinds of learners is selective producers. And I find that these kids are a big challenge because selective producers, school is a buffet table. And so they look at what's offered out there, the tasks, the assignments, the projects, and they say, okay, I'll do that one. I won't do that one. I'll do this one. I won't do that one. But it's frustrating because they are capable of high performance, but they're making some destructive decisions on their part as to whether or not they're going to engage. And the factor tends to be, I'm interested in that, I'm not interested in that. Then finally are the underachievers group we defined previously, and that's severe and persistent discrepancies. There are several factors that influence whether a student achieves academically in school. I'm going to briefly share these. And again, I'd like you to think about students that you have worked with or in your presently or in the past, and what would be the issue? What would you say was variable related to their lack of performance? First is academic self-perception. Students who have high academic self-esteem go at learning a very different way than those that have an attitude about this is too hard, I'm not good at this. So academic self-perception, how you view yourself as a learner, is a factor in whether or not you're going to achieve. Attitudes towards school, what I mean by this is some students and their parents have a low value for learning. And because of that, they don't engage in the same way. So we have to think about attitudes that the students have towards school. Oftentimes those attitudes come from either a parent or a peer group. So we have to be aware of both. Next, there's attitudes towards teachers and classes. And this is that frustrating thing where a student will work for this teacher and not this teacher. A student will produce in this class, but not in this class. Very frustrating, but it does reflect their attitudes towards particular teachers and particular classes. Motivation and self-regulation, we know is important. What we know is if students have some control and some opportunity to engage in decisions related to teaching and learning, they're much more motivated to do the work. And finally is goal valuation. And what I mean by this is that students are looking at the goals that you have set for them. And they are considering whether that goal is a value for them or not. And they're going to be more engaged if they have see the value of a particular learning goal. We also know that with gifted learners, we sometimes have a set of problematic beliefs, and this is coming from students who are underachievers. One thing that you'll hear is, I'm just not good at this. And the reason they'll say that to us is that they have a strong fear of failure. And they are concerned that if they do try it, they could fail. So it's easier to just excuse your performance by saying, I'm just not good at this. Second is, this is dumb and a waste of my time. What this tells us is that students fail to see that the work they're doing is meaningful, relevant, and important. And finally, there's those students who have a belief that they don't like me and do not want me to succeed. That it could be a coach, it could be a classroom teacher, it could be anyone within your school setting or even outside. These students generally believe that it doesn't matter how great they do, there's forces working against them. And these people have made a decision about what these kids are and what they can produce. And so therefore they look at, well, why put effort into this? Because it's not going to turn out well anyhow. other research threads, and I'm calling these threads, everyone, because there's not substantial research about it. There's enough patterns in the research that say to us, we should pay attention to this. So first is inconsistent parenting techniques between significant adults and students. Where this falls into is sort of that power struggle, where one parent says, yes, this is important, and you've got to do your best in it. And another parent who says, well, I wasn't good in that anyhow, and I'm doing fine. So there may be inconsistencies in the way the child is being parented. Secondly, a thread indicates that there may be issues with underachievement around parents who are either overly lenient or overly strict. And the final item in this list, I certainly saw as a teacher and as someone who worked with underachievers, is unclear whether associating with non-achievers is a cause of underachievement or whether it's the result of being an underachiever. And one of the things I always did in my preliminary work with an underachiever is I talked to teachers and parents about who do they hang out with. In other words, what this research would say is that students who are associating with other students who have a low value for learning, that feeds into their own sense of non-achievement. The other thing is, I saw with my middle school kids that those who were underachievers became part of a group of underachievers. And what they were looking for is somebody to affiliate with. So therefore, if they were non-performing, they looked for other non-performing performers as a friendship group. Heacox and CAGT have done some specific work with underachievement amongst gifted learners. Research was conducted in 2010 and 2013. And this is what they came up with as variables or factors of underachieving gifted. First, that sometimes the dive may happen because of an unusual or unexpected event in a student's life. This could be a change in schools. It could be a new member of the family. It could be a divorce, a new spouse, lots of different things that are affecting the students' lives. With one of my underachievers, the unusual, unexpected event was that he was cut from high school varsity hockey that he'd been preparing to since he was about 6 years old. Okay. Second issue is power and control. And this can happen between a parent and a student or between a teacher and a student, where one is saying you will and the student is saying, oh no, I won't. Conflicting messages I referred to previously. We may have students that have learning holes. In other words, I'm calling it a deficit. And if we can pick up that piece, they're going to be more successful. Lack of intellectually stimulating environment and support for students' passions. And finally, a fixed mindset of intelligence. I'm assuming that most, if not all of you, are familiar with Carol Dweck's work on mindsets. If you remember, a growth mindset are kids that will bounce back from a time when they were not performing their best because they have an attitude about, I'll try harder, I can be better at this. And so they bounce back from what could be viewed by them at least as a failure. A fixed mindset is basically, I was born this way. I'm good in math, I'm not good in social studies. A fixed mindset, students are much more locked into what they think they are, and it provides an excuse for the subjects that they do not do as well in. Underlearning, and this is the new work from Eleanor Van Gerven, underlearning occurs when a gifted learner is not offered a curriculum or learning opportunity in their zone of proximal development, but rather tasks that are in their comfort zone. Learning process is insufficiently attuned to the gifted student's educational needs. What Eleanor is saying with that is underlearning is a school factor. It has to do with teaching and learning and what opportunities the students are given to really achieve the level that they're capable of, and to follow their curiosities and their interests. So while we talk about underachievement behavior, underlearning has to do with teaching and learning, has to do with the classroom, and the classroom as managed by a teacher, and as the curriculum is planned by a teacher, or if there's a district kind of curriculum committee. With underlearning, gifted students are not stimulated to develop new knowledge and skills. They may not have access to the next level or new learning. In other words, it's like you're a fourth grader, you're not going to do that till you're in sixth. The student's self-actualization of their developmental potential lags behind where it could have been. And finally, the student's developmental potential is not as optimally called upon. They are falling short of what they could do. And it's not a student factor, it's a learning factor. Underlearning can be invisible, and this is what makes it hard for us to think about who are our students who are underlearning. In thinking about that, we have to ask ourselves questions as educators. And the first one is, how do we know the knowledge, skills, and processes that could be offered to the student? How far or deep could the student reach? And what innovations or accomplishments are going unpursued? It's important that we sort of break the boundaries about this is what a fourth grader should learn, this is what a 16-year-old should learn, but rather think about what are the needs of the students, how far and deep can they go, how complex can their work be. Finally, how do teachers know what they may not know about a student's true learning capacity? Sometimes when we look at performance, even on summative assessment, there is a ceiling around that. What we're looking for is the students who have achieved that goal. But what we don't know is how far could we go beyond that goal. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about underlearning. Underlearning is not a measure of the student or their achievements, but a measure of ineffective learning opportunities. Wow, that's a big statement from Eleanor. Ineffective learning opportunities. Underlearning is putting restrictions on a gifted student's learning. And what do those restrictions look like? First of all, they look like a limited and inflexible curriculum. So we're not seeing the pace, depth, and complexity and rigor that we'd like to see for gifted learners. There's a lack of purposeful interventions on the part of classrooms teachers, because in some cases, gifted kids are performing just fine, thank you, and really performing at high levels. And so when a classroom teacher is thinking about who might I need to do an intervention for because their performance is not reflecting their potential, the GT students are often not considered. And so there's not the intervention level with gifted students as there is with struggling learners. An inability or unwillingness to make instructional decisions based on pre-assessment and formative assessment data. In other words, we are heavy in American schools into data, both in pre-assessment and in formative assessment. It's only as good as its use. So if a teacher doesn't know how to use that data to make instructional decision, or they're unwilling to use it, that can feed into underlearning. Physical learning environment that lacks support, collaboration, and active engagement, and where the students are not allowed to engage in managing the learning tasks for themselves. Age peers are also an issue, that in some cases, those age peers are setting up a competitive practice with the students, and that's because they don't understand learning differences, and they kind of view everybody the same. Families can also influence underlearning if the family does not help the child set realistic goals, if they compare their child to others, and if they do not support learning in positive ways. When you look through the variables that I have on this page that feed into underlearning, what you see is a summary, really, or examples of Eleanor Van Gerven's work on student ecological systems. And what she has done is look at what are the things that influence a student and his or her performance in school. And she notes the teacher's part of that, the physical learning environment, the curriculum, the peer group, and the family. And if you think about underachievers, any of those five could be influencing academic underachievement. With underlearning, the factors tend to be more centered around the teacher doing the planning and the curriculum provided, and certainly some influence of an inflexible learning environment that says everybody does the same thing at the same time. What I'd like you to think about as you come away from this evening is, are there students that you would call underachieving gifted students because there is not a match between their readiness, their interest, and their learning preference? And then secondly, are there students that you work with who are virtually underlearning based on the curriculum that's offered to them? There is some work from Fredericks that talks about how do we get gifted students interested and passionate about academics. And I think these are important for us to think about when we find students are sort of dragging their feet. According to this research, gifted kids need cognitively complex tasks, but they also need the tasks that we're asking them to do to be meaningful and challenging. They need to pose and solve real problems. They need opportunities to incorporate the things they're interested in and where they see their future going into the learning in the classroom. They need some choice. And we've been talking about this for quite a while, that the motivation for learning is choice. And so the more opportunities we can give our students have choice in product, process, or content, the better. And they also need to feel they have some control over how they complete the tasks. And I think that kind of fits in with choice. How do you want to show me what you have learned? We suggest if these elements increase students' interest and passion for academic work, why would we not apply them to the regular curriculum in differentiating for gifted underachievers? Instructional needs and differences should be addressed on a daily basis. So thinking about these elements that would increase passion and interest in academics may help us address some of the issues around underachievement. I also created 12 items that you can use to raise the curriculum ceilings for gifted learners. And so what we need to do is to consider our curriculum and instructional practices, and does that result in underlearning for gifted students? What I've done then is listed 12 different ways that you can lift the ceiling of curriculum. First being include broad-based issues, themes, and problems. Use curriculum extensions and enhancements. Allowing students to move at their own pace, which is often accelerated for TT learners. Make sure that you're not caught in the trap of, this is what we do at this grade level, this is what we do at this age level, this is what seniors do, etc. They need access to information, ideas, and perspectives and viewpoints that are not necessarily affiliated with their grade or age. We talked about this a lot in Gifted Land. Students need depth, complexity. But we also have to lay down that lens that if everyone could do it, it's not really complex or in-depth enough for gifted learners. And I think this particular instance is what opens us up sometimes to criticism, because fellow teachers or parents view anybody can do that. Why is it just the gifted learners who get to do it? So make sure the depth and complexity would be inappropriate for other students, but just right for gifted learners. 6 is we want to use more sophisticated instructional strategies with these learners. So thinking about Socratic dialogue, Socratic discussion, and something that is discussed in depth in the Red Book on differentiation for gifted, case studies. We want to make sure we don't forget about creative thinking. That one way we can lift the ceiling is to engage and nurture creative thinking within that content. Giving our learners opportunities to meet with experts in a field of study or mentors, much easier now when they can do it face-to-face or online, because what we want to do is connect what they're learning to what is a real world example of that. Number 9 is personalization. And that means allowing some self-selection on the part of the learners and an ability to address some of their interests and passions. And it's technology, but not just drill and kill technology, but technology that encourages analytical thinking and innovation. 11 is that focus again on innovation. We don't want them just to cut and paste other people's ideas. What we want them to come up with some new ideas, perspectives, thoughts, and insights of their own, because that in fact is innovation. And then finally, we are concerned about the affective setting for gifted learners. So we want to make sure that their experiences help them develop their self-understanding, help them recognize their talents, and become self-directed, self-regulated learners in the classroom. This is from Van Gerven's work, and I found this rather stunning research, so I'll show you both parts of it. It is expected that during the learning process, students make mistakes, ask questions, and experience uncertainty. The teacher expects this to be the case for most students. In such circumstances, the teacher willfully intervenes in a way that changes the student's knowledge, skills, or behaviors. And the key word is willfully intervene. The educator provides additional instruction to these students, supports or directly encourages them to try to cope with failure and disappointment, to persevere and to celebrate success. Not the story for gifted learners. When learning becomes challenging for gifted learners, they make mistakes and feel uncertain like all other students. However, the teacher's reaction to a struggling gifted learner is not as immediate as it might be to other learners within the classroom. The teacher's reaction may be to excuse the student from a challenging task and offer them something less challenging. The purpose being so that the students can work independently and can't make mistakes and feel bad. So in other words, the teacher reaction to struggling learners is unlike the response provided to other students within the classroom. This is an important thing to remember and to monitor. Okay, on a consistent basis, dumbing down engages gifted learners much like their less talented classmates. This process may reinforce student attitudes towards underlearning. So by saying, you're struggling with this, do this instead, we're in fact dumbing down our expectations and the learning experience for the student, which feeds into the underlearning. This is a quote from a student: "When I do not achieve, I get an easier task. That task may let me feel good about myself because I score within the top rank of my class. However, it did not take any effort to do it, and I did not develop any new skills or knowledge." Right? Okay. One of the things that I have to share with you is there's no single way to address underachievement or underlearning because gifted students differ one from the other. So therefore, as we think about interventions, we have to think about an individualized approach. And the ecological system that Gervin talks about may give us some clues as to who or what is contributing the underachievement or the underlearning. And this goes back to this, is the issue around the teacher and teaching and learning, the learning environment, the curriculum, which may be limited, the influence of peers, the influence of a family. So however, it may mean that in order to move them out of underlearning or underachievement, teachers must change their typical teaching learning methods to remove established curriculum ceilings. When we're doing intervention with gifted learners, I think it is very easy to want to give up, but it takes a great deal of persistence. What I did with this slide, and I encourage you to read through it on your own, is steps that would be taken in an intervention with an underachiever. And this will step you right through the process, each time examining the issues around the student's lack of performance. So I encourage you to take a look at these 8 steps and see if this helps you set a path for one of the students that you're concerned about. I included in the PowerPoint references for this presentation. And now what I want is I am open to questions that you may have related to underlearning or underachievement.
All right, great, thank you. We do have a couple questions from the chat, but I want to encourage others, if you have questions, go ahead and just put them in the comments and I'll help field them for Diane. One of them, Diane, was a question, a point of clarity, so that is ADHD considered a learning disability in this context? One of the first things you said was, we're talking about underachievement without a diagnosable disability. So is ADHD considered? I
need to refer you to what is the current special education law. When I wrote the 2nd edition of Differentiating for Gifted Students, sections on special education completely changed due to a change in policy and procedure and language around students who have learning difficulties. ADHD is certainly included in terms of some things that may impede a student's progress, but I would need you to take a look at your state special education law and maybe even the federal, to see where are they putting ADHD within that spectrum of students with learning difficulties.
Thank you. So another one from the comment section is, who is defining achievement in this case? Is this based on their IQ, state standards? I struggle with calling kids underachievers when adults are setting the expectations without input from the students. In our adult lives, we get to set our own goals and decide how to allocate our time, but kids are not able to.
Exactly. Like it or not, we're in standards-based education, which means we consider success when students have mastered or achieved a particular set of learning goals. And so we are measuring that students and say they're achievers or they've mastered the learning goals for this grade level or this course. I agree with you that in real life, we have some control over our performance and also the evaluation of our performance. But with students in the educational climate we're in right now, we do need to take a look as achievement being mastery of determined goals for a course or grade level. I do think that other schools, when we say achievement, what we're looking at is even standardized achievement tests. Is there a match between qualitative aptitude and math scores in achievement? Or in some schools they'll look at the quantitative measure and how the student is performing within the classroom. And so achievement can be defined in a variety of ways, but usually it's either based on data from something like achievement tests, or it's based on a definition that has been created by the teachers. But I don't think that there is a standard use of it. I think schools are deciding what they believe achievement is. And as such, achievement measures may differ from one school to another, from one state to another. And that's where things get muddy, okay?
Thank you. When I look, I see myself and I see the kids I've taught over the years in a lot of the recommendations and a lot of the thoughts in here. And I keep coming back to this question about relationships and building relationships. Do you think that a lot of these diagnoses of underachievement or underlearning and response to them, I mean, can they be addressed through building those relationships?
the issue with underlearning is that is controlled by the school, by the teacher and the school curriculum. So I think that's pretty set in stone. You know, this is the way it is. But I do think that relationships with teachers, supportive classrooms, and accepting peers do increase motivation of students to learn. And I think that's the way we can go at it, is if students were more motivated, interested, engaged in the learning in the classroom, that is going to be the impact on the underachievement. But with underlearning, it really is under the control of the teacher or the curriculum, because underlearning means that we're not setting those goals and those learning experiences high enough for gifted learners. And so they are underachieving based on the curriculum and the teaching and learning that is being offered to them. And for me, that was the big aha with Eleanor's work, is I hadn't really thought about that. I mean, we've talked a lot about gifted kids need bigger complexity, depth, and pace that may be different from others. But we've never really dug deep into this whole issue is underlearning. Could the child go farther than he or she is allowed to do by basis of the curriculum or by basis of the teacher's instructional planning? And so to me, that's the big aha, is that underlearning, it's hard for us, we can't blame the student for being an underlearner, because the student is underlearning based on lack of opportunity to achieve potential. Underachievement definitely engages the behavior of the student. So I think the relationships, Mark, are essential regardless. I would think with underachievement, the relationship might be a key to unlocking some of those behaviors. Remember what I had said about my underachievers who would work for one teacher and not for another. That all has to do with relationship. What's going on in that classroom that this child will work for this teacher and won't work for this one? It was distinct. And my middle school, high school kids could actually relate reasons why it wouldn't work for particular teachers. And we'd like to think it's like teaching style and learning preference, but sometimes it's attitudinal. It has to do with the interactions and the relationships between the teacher and that GT student, but also the teacher and the peer group. Does that help, Mark?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for all those details. I was just going to add that, and sometimes middle schoolers especially will tell you very directly what problem they're having with that teacher and why they're not achieving in there.
Exactly. The thing that I'd hear is, I won't work for him. And so then I have to say, okay, what's going on in that particular class? You know, why won't you work? What's going wrong for you? How would you like it to be different? But they will outright say, I won't work for him, or I won't work for her.
Yeah. Well, let's end it on another question that it talks about opportunity and understanding too. And it goes a little bit different direction from your presentation, but I'm interested what you have to say about this. What about students who underachieve because they're twice exceptional and struggle to get understood by their schools? And the school that leads to the feelings of this underachiever because they might be restricting them from AP classes and so forth, but are kept out because of these exceptionalities.
Mm-hmm. I would hope that more and more schools are looking at double-hatted kids, twice exceptional students. I think in the history of American education and in gifted land, this emergence of twice exceptional or double-hatted kids is fairly new, but it certainly is receiving our attention at this point. So one of the things that I think is important for us to remember, that although this student may have learning difficulties in a particular area, maybe it's a processing problem, can't forget that the gifted do. Okay, I can give you an example of that. One of the students that I worked with, who was elementary age, had very serious social, emotional problems. He was explosive, he'd throw things. He had a full-time, what we called handlers with him for the entire day. He was also gifted. And so I went to every single staffing that was held for him, dealing with the behavior, because I had to speak for his giftedness. And so I think we've got double-headed kids, we have to consider both parts of them. In some cases, you might prioritize one over another for a while. For example, with this young man, we had to get the behavior under control, to a degree at least, before he could engage in more challenging or complex learning. But we always up front talked about him as gifted and having a learning difficulty. In this case, it was behavior difficulty. But I think we have to keep both in mind. If the kids are having, if kids who are exceptional are having problems getting into specialized courses, I take a look at what's the criteria for entering those courses, and is there a way we can get around it? You know, special ed law tells us we have to monitor and adjust and make, you know, adaptations and accommodations for kids. But that applies also to students who are gifted and have another disability. And so we have a responsibility to really address the total child, their socio-affective needs, as well as their learning needs. Does that help?
Yes, and you know, and having been around gifted education for a couple decades now, one of the strongest growth areas, I think, for us as gifted educators has been working on understanding twice exceptionality.
Exactly.
And it is such a huge monumental task to help classroom teachers understand giftedness who don't have much experience with that. And then to add that layer of twice exceptionality then is another huge task.
Exactly.
And an essential one.
Yeah, and one of the districts where I was a district facilitator or leader for gifted services, I was placed in the special education department. And the reason we did that was there were so many commonalities between the work that special educators were doing and what I was doing. And the director of special education was highly supportive of double-headed kids. And so that was really the best department for me to be in because we had so many commonalities. And I think in the past, we've considered either you're gifted or you're not. And if you have learning difficulties, you're not. And so how can you be? So it has, as you said, Mark, it's been a journey for all of us to think about how these kids function, what they need from us, and how we can address their learning or behavior difficulties while we also provide for their intellectual needs.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for so many thoughtful comments and your thoughtful answers to your questions in the presentation. And it's been wonderful to be able to host you. Diane is going to lend us some written documents that we can share, and Colorado Gifted will make it obvious with a link or something like that how we'll share them. I can't give you the exact details now, but you remember the recordings are on coloradogifted.org under Conversations with CAGT, and this one will appear there pretty soon too. But one of our viewers was wondering, would there be a copy of the PDF, a PDF of your slides in the resources?
That's what the handouts are, Mark.
Okay.
They are PDFs of the slides.
All right.
And for example, I wouldn't include the one that's on your screen now with the hands and the question marks because it's not really giving you any information that you'd want to take and use. But what I wanted you to have are the PowerPoints because the slides are packed with information. You may want to go back and look at those and think about a student in your classroom underlearning an issue with some of your kiddos. Is underachievement really what we're talking about, or is this student a selective producer? what's really going on. So I really think it's important that we find a way to give those resources to you. And it sounds like you all will work on it. So that's great.
I will be printing out my PDF copy too. It's a wonderful summary for us, just packed with a lot of useful things. So thank you again, everybody, for joining.